Okay, here we are again. We're back here to do our value mixing. This is a mixture of burnt umber and ultramarine blue. These are our standbys. We just keep going back to this and revisiting it. Golden, burnt umber, and ultramarine blue. And I had my palette knife and I mixed those together. What we're going to put over here at the other end now, what we're introducing is titanium white. Tapping it on the table. There we go. That loosened the lid right up. So value, in my mind, value's the difference between light and dark. So you can have gray values and middle values and dark values. As you go towards white, your value is lighter. As you go towards dark, your value is darker. We're gonna aim to put about 5 steps. Just remember, generally people have 5 fingers, 4 fingers and a thumb, but 5 digits. And we try to mix about half and half right in the middle. Doesn't matter if it's not perfect. And then you step out from that. You mix a darker value. Notice I still have water on my palette from earlier. That's not a problem. Now these outer, darker ones, you can see the difference between here and here. They're pretty close. But if you look, these look very far apart. These, you don't see quite as much difference between them. These are fairly close too. So let's try adding a little bit of white to this one to make the difference here and here a little bigger. I like that. These are still very close. So let's come over here. That feels better. Now, what I'm going to be doing is wiping my palette knife off in the rag a little more often. It's not such a big deal here with black to white, but when we get into the color mixing, we're going to want to keep this clean so that we're not like contaminating one color with another color. One of the things that happens to painters, especially when you're learning, is that your colors get kind of muddy, and cleaning off your brushes and your palette knife often in between the mixing process will help your colors to be more clear and concisely different. So now we have 3 steps. We're going to do 2 more. Some students will measure out very methodically. I'm a little more like, oh, let's just guess. Let's see what happens if we add that. That's why I'm not a carpenter or baker. I'm a better painter. I'll measure to a point and then, I don't know. Somehow or another, I think a dash more or a dash less isn't going to make a difference in a recipe, and it always does. Things that I make are edible, but it's not, I wouldn't say I'm a gifted baker by any means. Whereas with painting, you can dance around a little more with it. I think eyeballing it is perfectly appropriate in the situation of paint mixing. So let's look at this now. I see some steps here, they're more even. This step to this step's pretty close. These two are almost identical. Let's make this a little lighter. Tell you the truth, we want this to be almost white. And since I have a really big pile of very light gray right now, I'm gonna grab some of that and add it over here versus coming from my tiny little pile of white on the end. I think this could go slightly darker. That feels nice. A little more. And a little more. Huh, I'm pretty happy with that lineup. You're looking to make 5 equal steps between your black to white. If you get 6 or 7 steps in between, that's excellent, and not a problem. I don't usually do the extra work of it or ask the students to, but sometimes it just happens. You know, everybody's mind works a little differently, or different days I mix more steps than other days. What I would say though is if you're only mixing 3 steps or 4 steps between, that you're probably missing something. You know, you want to watch for mixing white to this middle gray and then just having black on the side, or mixing this middle gray to black and just having white over on the side. You definitely want to try to have these 2 extra between here and here. I mean, even simply, we're just trying to train our brains to think about how values work. It won't be long before we'll be doing this with colors, or we'll be mixing the color red in complementary steps to green. So this is really simplifying that and breaking it down. What can be a little more complicated is now we're going to be looking at these plants and trying to think of them in white to black, when really we're looking at things that are green and brown. So in your mind, you're having to sort of suspend what you see and think about, for example, let's see how I can get this to show up. Yeah. So we're going to be looking at this value and comparing it to that value. You can see the value inside the plant and how dark that is, whereas when the light's hitting it here, and how much lighter here is than, for example, right here. So when I'm looking at my underpaintings that we're going to bring back over here and paint over top, I'm going to be really thinking about where does this fall versus my chart. And this, with the way the light's hitting it right now, is pretty light. So I'm probably even going to exaggerate and come down here towards the whiter end of things. But I'll talk you through that, and I'll do a couple quick little examples here, and we'll keep talking about it. It's funny, sometimes I think I'm talking for like a few minutes, and I look at the timer and I've already gone on for like 9 minutes. We'll put this color palette over on the side and bring back in. Let's see, which one should we look at? We'll spend a couple minutes on this one. It's still a little wet. Now, as you put these values in, I want you to remember you wouldn't be moving towards finishing your painting yet. You're just getting to the middle stage. Even if you had color covering this whole entire surface, this would still be, in many ways, just another step of underpainting. Yes, we're overlaying with color, but we're not trying to put any details on yet. The brush that I'm grabbing, this is a number 8 Princeton shader. When brushes have shorter handles like this, they're a little more like a craft brush, so they have a different sizing. It's kind of like clothing sizes where one company's 4 fits and the next company you have to wear size 8 or 16 to 20. So what you want to think about is these numbers always don't relate, given that before I was using like a size 0 or a size 6, yet they were bigger brushes than these. The 0 had a tiny little bristles, but that 6 was actually about this size. So sometimes that happens, especially with a cheaper brush. This is basically a little throwaway brush with a fake sable. But I am going to use it to come in here. And so this is still kind of wet inside, and I think I'm going to take a minute here to try to paint in these lighter values in the back. What I grabbed here is not white right out of the tube, but next step away from it. I'm just coming in here and rather thickly. Before we were using really washy paint, it would be okay to continue to use wash right now, but I want to have time to work on 2 before I finish this out, so I'm really dragging some thicker paint across here. And I could use a bigger brush than this, make it go faster, but I sort of like the texture of these smaller strokes. So now, this is where I might be really thinking, you know how this got a little messy in here? This is where I get to look at that and trim it up a bit. Also, when I picked up my plant, moved it around, that changed everything also. So maybe this is not quite as large as I painted it. This leaf comes out to a little bit of a point. Well, now I do see this. This is gonna, I'm gonna fill this in with a darker value. I can see these leaves have changed. So you can change things. You're not committed to your underpainting in a way that you can't come in and say, oh, I want to move this or change that. Sometimes I come in with a finer brush and do the line work in order to make those changes, but and you can be pretty thoughtful about this. I'm painting fairly fast. I tend to be a fast painter in the first place, and in some ways I'm trying to slow this down to explain it to you. But you can be a little more quieter in your mind and more methodical about this and not feel like you're being too fussy, but we'll figure out how to deal with this leaf then. Now the tabletop, where there's a lot of light hitting down, so I'm actually going to use white right out of the tube. There's a little bit of gray. I rinsed my brush out before I picked up and went into that white, but there is a little bit of gray still in it, and that's good too. leave my transparent shadows the way they are right now. I don't feel like I need to come in and really change that too much. And I went to a slightly darker gray over here on this side of the paper. I tell you the truth, I have to put more white out on my palette. I just ran out of white paint, so take a minute to do that. There we go. Not even a minute, 3 seconds. Okay, coming back with some more white paint. I don't know if you can see how lumpy that paint is on there, but I'm happy with that. I wanted to have some texture. That'll vary depending on what mood I'm in, but it feels good to me at the moment. Now I'm seeing what I did with this fern. I had it turned. There we go. That's better. So what I recognized when I was originally doing these values is that the fern is actually darker in value than this pot. I didn't paint it that way, but I'm going to go in and fix that now. So I'm seeing the pot value is right about the middle of my palette. We're going to say it's here. I'm covering up where that leaf's going to come over top, and I'm not too worried about that. Notice I'm blanketing the paint, but not so thickly that we don't have a little bit of it popping out here and there. I'm squinting, the light's hitting it more on this side, and then I went to the next value darker for over here, but there's still some of that other gray paint on my brush, so it's a little bit darker, but not a whole lot. Just decided to come in here with this and I have the edge across here. I'm rinsing out my brush. Now I'm going to come in here with the staghorn fern, and you know, right here is black right out of the tube. That's this value. The value of the fern, and one of the things I'm doing is squinting with my eyes as I'm looking at the fern, because it changes. It's pretty light in here where the light's hitting it, but where it comes over this edge and the light's coming from this direction, it's darker when it's in front of this pot. So if the pot could actually go a little bit lighter. But for now, let's go, I'm gonna maybe exaggerate how dark this fern is. Oh, that feels pretty good. So here's our fern leaf. It's coming forward. And this one too. Now what's happening here? I'm gonna get some black right out of the tube, because right between these two leaves is very dark. Darker than I could manage to paint it with as wet as my brush is right now. So, but also I'm dropping down one value lighter to come across here, because the light is hitting them a little more as they go up into the pot. And the same with here. This is a little lighter, and then it comes down and drops and it gets darker. So I'm gonna put some darker value on my brush. I have to clean my brush off because all that gray paint from before just wants to stick into the ferrule. The ferrule of the brush is what goes up into this metal piece is the ferrule. So there's bristles close to the ferrule. They just want to collect that paint. So we're not finishing this fern painting right now. We're just getting the base layer of colors down. Whoop. See how I picked up that white? That was an accident. Just happened to be some wet white paint behind there and I accidentally grabbed it. So this went a little lighter than I wanted, and what I'm gonna do is let it just dry, not try to fix it right now, and I'll come back and deal with that later. I might even be able to use a little bit of that light coming right across here because these areas are lighter. And then it has this really beautiful little like curly white leaf behind here. And I don't have a lot of room to describe it. And there's one across here too. So that's something I'll have to make a mental note to come back in and really get at with a tiny brush. Even those soft little indicators, even if I can't in this format describe it in a lot of detail, it still reads to me. I know what a plant like this looks like enough that I read those as not being inaccurate. Okay. It's a little wider through here. And this one's a little wider too. This is getting wet in here, so let's move over here to the pothos plant, which I think feels highly neglected compared to this part of the painting. So this tip, this pothos leaf is dark. And then we have a big one that's coming across here that keeps getting kind of messed up in the scheme of things. And it has a very dark tip that comes over right in front of this pot. And this one back here sticks out. It's kind of dark. You know what? Actually, I made up a story about that back there, and it's not really working. That one, the leaf kind of flops over a little bit. Which is a hard thing to describe. And I think I wanted it to be pointy, but it's not. Oh, there. I actually just flipped it up in the background with my hand, so now it looks like this. I'm much happier. There. So squinting at this green, the green of the pothos plant is very similar to the green of the staghorn fern. They're almost identical in color. They would be fun. I think we'll be seeing more of these plants because those are some colors that I like to mix when we do the green to red color mixing for the complementary color mixing. So I wouldn't be surprised if I don't bring these back a couple lessons in. I don't think next week that we'll be looking at them. Here we go. I'm happy with those values. I think as I would go into the detail of these leaves that we would be using a much smaller brush. And actually, these are pretty wet, but I'm gonna look for a tiny brush. This is another little craft brush, a number 2, Winsor & Newton. Winsor & Newton would definitely say that's not a craft brush, that's a paintbrush. They're not a craft company, but it looks like a craft brush to me. And now I'm rethinking my ball jar. Somehow or another, it went this way when it needs to come down a little bit more. Maybe my leaf got too big, that's it. So the jar, because I can see the jar right here. So you can change things. And actually, your painting's usually probably a little more interesting if your marks aren't all exactly the same. I like to bring a little drama in, scraping in with the end of the brush. Moving things around a little bit. This is pretty dark across here. So I'm just squinting. I see some white right here, some white right here, some white in here. Glass is almost better if you paint it as though it's not there. Because you can see through it, I focus on painting what's under the glass. So I see the darker value here, and then next to it, it's an even darker value. And in here, it's dark. I'm rinsing my brush out. As I rinse my brush out, I also dry it with the rag before I come back in, because too much water at this point isn't helpful. And then it's darker in here. Well, there's a really dark streak right through here. And then this water line makes this all quite dark. So come in here. There's some plant roots down here. So what I want you to do is take your underpaintings and paint back over them with value. You do that mixing of the value across your palette, and then take all those fun underpaintings you made and choose to go back into them. You don't have to cover every single square inch up. It's okay if a few little pockets of light are showing through. This is all the further these value studies are going to get taken. We're not going to come in and paint into them again. We'll start talking about details way later on, and in some ways you'll just start getting there naturally as you paint. You'll take your paintings past what I'm describing to you now, because I'm doing a demo, and then when you get started painting, sooner or later you'll get carried away and you'll go past what I described in the demo, and that's how it should be. So don't feel like this would have to be your stopping point, but it will be mine, particularly because I would just want to do one little quick demo going more in detail with this pathos, with the one that we did that was a little more blown up. It doesn't hurt to be like, oh, I want to get paint to cover every surface of gesso or pre-primed paper that's coming through here. See how that kind of settles everything down? That's nice. You know, I'm not thrilled with how this leaf looks here. If I look at my thing, that's the thing that bothers me most. So I just kind of reached my hand over and turned the leaf so it's more towards me. And I'm happier with that solution. And then what that does with my background here is really lightens this up, so that those plants are next to each other, but only overlapping just barely right over here. Plus there's this horizon line that comes across there. And then I can take this and we would have to let that dry to work it back into it very much more. But I'm pretty happy where that is just an, you know, one layer of color over the underpainting and a value study. We're going to put this over the side to dry. And quickly, we're going to come back to here. Still already have my values all mixed up. I'm going to move this staghorn over to the side. I have some vermilion ink trying to make its way on the seam, but we're not dealing with that tonight. That would be fun practice for contour with ink. So I'm bringing this pothos, see it's right over here on the edge, I'm almost looking right down at it. And then quickly, I'm going to use a bigger brush. We'll see, this might be too big, but this is a size 12 filbert bristle. I'm just going to come in here and like try to describe some of these values. Squinting helps. I'm happy with that as a base value. So I'm looking, I'm just patching that in. Oop, this one is darker, and if I'm analyzing this correctly, this leaf actually comes over top. It's quite dark, and actually it sort of comes out from the stem like this. And then, I know I painted this background black before, but now we're going to come in white. So just as a quick value study, this leaf into this leaf. You are dark. I'm squinting at this leaf over top of the one behind it, and this one's darker right here. But then the way it turns and the light hits it, it's a little lighter on this side. And then behind it, it's very dark. And once again, lighter on this side. For some reason, the light's really hitting it back there, and even a little bit like right across here. And then this one back here could go darker than I just painted, but we'll let that dry a bit and then come back in. Say lighter here. And you definitely a little lighter down here. And you know, once again, this is like zeroing in and it's getting a little more abstracted, but I'm enjoying that. And I'm enjoying painting it a little looser and more gesturally. It started out as being a contour description with the line, but these movements are quite gestural. And so I'm looking at this leaf against this leaf, and this is whiter across here. The light's hitting that a lot. And then it's light here. These up here were more in shadow, but it gets a little, well, not quite that dark, although I think that's working. There we go. Can bring some more dark back into here. And then this leaf down here is dark. And now I'm just going to put this brush to the side. I'm going to come back in here with this smaller crafty brush. And because what I see in here in the center is a lot of little line descriptions where there's some leaf behind here, but I can kind of see some stem. And you know, even across like here, kind of see those stems. I'll come in with some paint. Okay, that's it for today. Just want you to mix some value palettes and play around with your paintings and go over top of them. We're not trying to work a lot into detail. If you naturally go towards detail, that is not wrong. I'm just not trying to teach you to do that at this point. Sometimes it's hard for people to loosen up, so I kind of focus on the loosening up as part of the lesson because that's what you need to learn the most at this point. Play around with it. Send me some photos. Let me know how it goes. Thank you. Have a good night.